Hi everybody, my name is Miss B and today I'll be teaching you 5 watercolor techniques that you can do from home. Before we get started, let's go over what materials you'll need. You will need a newspaper, some watercolor paper, a paintbrush, some watercolor paints, and I'm using liquid watercolor, but you can use whatever you have at home, a sponge, and a glass of water to rinse your brush. Now that we've gone over what materials you'll need for today, I'm going to talk about the different parts of a paintbrush. From left to right, we have the handle where you hold the brush, the ferrule, the part that holds everything together, and the bristles, the part that makes all of our marks. Okay everybody, so make sure that you have a newspaper protecting your workspace, and wake up your paints if you haven't done so already. Just add a little bit of water to the paint and swirl it around and you're ready to go. So we are going to start with the wet on wet technique. Okay everybody, so for the wet on wet technique, we are going to take some water from our cup and we're going to paint it onto our piece of paper. This will leave a small layer of water for the paint to disperse or spread on. And the main difference with this technique and just painting directly onto the paper is the colors will bleed into each other or disperse a little bit more evenly, and it will look a little bit lighter because as you're adding paint to the water that's on the surface of your paper, it will blend together and make the paint a little bit more transparent. You can add as many layers of paint as you want to make it as opaque as you want or full of color. Now, this is all you need to do for the wet on wet technique. Our next technique is the salted technique. Now, I have this grinder of salt, but whatever salt you have will work fine. But the bigger the grain of salt or the piece of salt, the best results you will see. So first, what we're going to do is paint on our color. Now, I'm choosing a dark color just to show you the contrast a little bit more. For this technique, we're going to paint directly onto our paper. And we're going to want to add quite a bit of water to this one because when we add our salt, it's going to collect all the water and some of the pigment or color from our paint is going to collect where our salt is. Okay, so now we're ready to add our salt. And what you're gonna do is, if you have a grinder, you're gonna grind it and you're gonna just sprinkle it wherever you want the salt to go. I'm just going to put mine all over my paper and we're going to set this off to dry. And we wait until this is completely dry to take the salt off. And we will show you what that looks like at the end. But as you can see, the salt has already started to collect some of that pigment and some of that water. Our next technique is called a gradient. That is when one color goes from super pigmented to very transparent, or you can have two colors bleed into each other seamlessly. I'm starting at the top of my paper with some of this blue pigment. And what we're going to do is add water to our brush and just paint the water onto our paper lower and lower until you start to see that the pigment becomes less colorful and more to the tone of the paper itself. The next technique we're going to be doing is called multiple washes. A wash is when you add a light layer of paint. This can be used as a background or it can take up as much space as you need it to. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is add our first layer. The next thing we're going to do is add some lines across our paper wherever you want. This could be a shape, it could be a line, it could be a swirl, whatever you want to do. I just did some lines to show you the contrast between one wash and 2 washes. You can keep doing this as many times as you want. And as you can see, where we have multiple washes, the color is a little bit darker than our first layer of wash. And that's all you need to do. Our next technique is called the sponging technique. And the first step of this is to add a wash of color as our background. Now, you can either use a dry or a damp sponge for this. I decided to try a dry one, but using a damp sponge will produce a slightly different texture than using a dry sponge. Okay, so now that we have our first wash down, we are going to dip our sponge in our watercolor paint, and we're going to dab or press gently onto our paper to get a nice sponged texture. Now you can repeat this as many times as you want all around your paper. And that is how you do the sponge technique.
Alright, I just wanted to thank everybody for following along with me. I hope you enjoyed making these 5 watercolor techniques. And just to recap, we did the wet on wet technique, the salted technique, gradient technique, multiple washes, and sponge. Thanks for watching.